our time, your time, my time, is the most valuable asset we have by far. Therefore, the highest leverage thing that you can do is to convince someone else to use their time on your project.
Kevin, it is great to have you back on the Learning Leaders Show. Welcome.
It's my delight and honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to chat with you.
So 2016, man, was the last time we talked. And I would imagine a lot has changed in your life. What are some of the big inflection points or moments since 2016 till now?
Well, we had this pandemic. I don't know if you heard about it, but that was, it came through. And my livelihood was giving talks in China about technology. And that immediately stopped, canceled, evaporated. And I haven't been back to China since then. I was there just right before the COVID, and not to Wuhan, but close. And so that has gone, and it's really unclear whether that will even come back because of the kind of shift in the relationship between China and the U.S. right now. I think the Chinese are a little bit more interested in trying to grow their own technology experts. So that was a big shift for me. So for almost 3 years, 2.5 years, I did not go anywhere after having, I wouldn't say live on the airplane, but I was traveling in motion tremendously, and that was a huge thing. And here's the weird thing: was I didn't miss it. I
Really?
didn't miss the traveling. Yeah, I was very content to be at home and stay down. And it wasn't that I was burned out; it's just that I was nice. It was a nice, different country, the country of home.
Yeah. Why China as opposed to everywhere else in the world?
That's a really great question. So through serendipitous, just got a bit of luck. My first book, Out of Control, was translated late. Came out in the early 90s, but it was translated late in the 2000s, maybe 2005, into Chinese at the very moment when the Chinese entrepreneurs like Jack Ma were starting up, and they read the book and found it inspirational for what they were doing and talked about it. And it's like having, so it's like having Steve Jobs read the book and talk about it, tell everybody they have to read this book. So that's what happened. So most of my fans numerically are in China.
Wow.
And
Huh.
and so they have translated all my books. In fact, The Inevitable, okay, this is a story I haven't told. The Inevitable actually began as a book that was only in Chinese.
Do you speak fluent Chinese?
No, I understand some Chinese, but what I meant was, the Chinese were so eager for my content that
Yeah.
and I wasn't writing books that fast. They said, "Can we translate? Can we make an anthology of your blog posts and then translate it into Chinese?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds like a good idea." So they made this book, and it was called Detecting, and it only appeared in Chinese. And then my agent, John Brockman, said, it's a pretty good book. It's better than most of the other books we publish, just this anthology of blog posts. Why don't we do an English version of it? And I said, fine, that's great. And then Brockman, being an agent, he said, well, like if we could maybe make a theme out of it, I could get more money for you. And I said, well, okay. And then the next step was, if we could rewrite parts of this. And so then it was pitched as this new thing. And then I wound up having to rewrite all the blog posts and everything. And so it was like, it was way more trouble than I was initially, but this origins was in the Chinese book, Detective.
Writing has created so many amazing opportunities for you. And I'm a huge believer, Kevin, that all leaders should have some sort of a writing practice, even if they choose not to publish, because
Sure.
writing creates
Sure.
clarity of thought. Leaders need to be clear thinkers.
Yeah.
I also nudge them and push them to get to the publishing point, even if it's just your own personal website, a blog, if you get to a book, whatever it may be. Can you share more about two-part? This is a lot, I know, because it's your life, but how writing creates clarity of thought, and
Right.
leaders need to be clear. So this is why leaders should be
Sure,
doing
sure,
it. This is a
sure.
leadership show, as well as how it's created a serendipity vehicle for you in your life
Sure,
and
sure,
created
sure.
so many opportunities.
The economic reality for publishing these days is that books don't even make any money, and so for me, they become an advertisement for the talks.
Mhm.
Again, saying that was my livelihood was not from the books, sales of the books. There were opportunity. They generate opportunities. To your point, the act of writing is exactly that. I am not a born writer. I am a very, very reluctant writer. I write under, I wouldn't say distaste, but I just avoid it at all possible. And there are people that I work with at Wired who are born writers, and I know what their day is like. And there are people who can say, I have an idea, I'm gonna write it down. I don't do it that way. I sit down and I don't have any ideas. And I write in order to find out what my ideas are. I write to
Mm.
figure out what it is that I think. It's not like it's making my thinking better. I don't even have the ideas until I write it. And it's that act of actually trying to write it that generates the ideas. And so I will sit down and I'll think, oh, I'm going to write about, AI or image generators. And I've been using my note. I'm going to say something about this. And then I make the first sentence, and even at the first sentence, I realize I don't know what I'm talking about. Do I really believe this? This is really true. I don't know what this is, and so then I have to go back and figure out and talk to more people and think about it a little bit more and work. And then I have so now I know what it is. Okay, I'm going to write the second sentence, and that's also it's like wait. I still don't know what I'm talking about. So there's this very laborious and painful process of getting that first draft out, which is just a killer for me. And so that is just hard because it's thinking. It's like having very clear thinking, and to get there requires um, thinking, observation, talking to people, sending it around, all that kind of stuff. And then at the end, there'll be these beautiful ideas. It looks like I just sat down and write the ideas, but it was not. It was the act of writing that generated it.
We're gonna launch right into your most recent book here, which is really cool book, and I'm so glad that you decided to take some of your writing again and put it into book form, right? Excellent advice for living, wisdom I wish I'd known earlier, because this stemmed off of a post that I told you that I've probably shared more than any other post, whether it's people who follow my Mindful Monday emails or just people I'm mentoring,
Sure, sure,
called
sure.
68 Bits of Advice. And one of those pieces of advice you write is the best way to learn anything is to try to teach what you know. And I would love for you to expand on this, because I think I've learned through the course of doing this show and then getting up on stages that is so true.
Right.
Of if someone's like, hey, you go give a speech on leadership development or being a learning leader, whatever it may be. Okay, yeah, I got that. And then all of a sudden you're in the prep process of trying to put your talk together and think about it. What am I going to say? How's it going to be compelling? How's it going to
Right,
help
right.
the audience? That's the part where so much learning happens at the prep, then the doing, then the feedback. In that loop, so much learning happens. How is it for you?
Yeah, it's very, 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 very similar. And I often joke that the best time to write your book is the year following when you've been on a book tour for a year, and then you know what the book is about, and that's when you should write the book,
Yeah.
because the same idea is that even writing it down, you don't really know until again you have to talk to it and explain it 1,000 times, and then at the end of that you're saying, now I know, I wish I could write my book now because I know what it's about finally. So
It's
yeah, so this iterative process, and that's another bit of advice in the book, is took me a long time to learn, which is you want to prototype your life, you want to prototype everything, you want to see things instead of having grand plans. You iterate your way, you make things knowing that you're going to throw them away along the way. That is the process. The process is lots and lots of versions, lots and lots of things that seem perfectly good enough, but you toss them to make them even better. You redo them over and over again, and that is true for whatever you're teaching or saying, is that it's very, I mean, there may be some mutants somewhere who are able to get it the first try, but even Jack Kerouac's, On the Road was not just an outpouring of one time. So you have to get this idea that you're going to keep prototyping, iterating, tossing out, backtracking. It's like life,
Yeah.
doing detours. It's the same process of making a great thing and making a great life are very, very equivalent.
Do you think that's hard for people to do?
It is. And again, for me, it took me a long time to understand that I was been a person making things my life, and the idea that I would make a chair or a bench or something and then toss it. I mean, for me, just making it was like once it was like, oh yeah, now I'm done. But watching YouTube and stuff is very clear that that's not how professionals do it. It's like that redoing things is not like redoing things is not the mark of an amateur. Redoing things is the mark of a professional, and that they're constantly. Then they have a little saying is make one to throw away, and that idea and this book, by the way, I prototyped in many ways. I prototyped first by putting it online, but actually physically made a little tiny bound book, which I don't have with me right here, and printed it on Amazon and made 5 copies of it just to see whether it worked, whether the size was right. And so my other books, my Asia book, I prototyped 3 different versions of that at different levels to see what it is. And so now I understand that anything I'm going to do, and it's like it took me, I don't know what it took. It took experience.
Yeah.
It took working with other people who were doing world-class level work and seeing what they were doing. It was watching YouTube for hours on end and seeing what professionals do, how they do things. It was working at Wired and seeing what it took again to make a world-class thing, which is that I mean, the thing about Wired that was just such a shock is, okay, we do a magazine every month. And after 7 years of every month putting out a magazine, you would think that it would become routine. But no, every single issue, it was a miracle that we got it out on the deadline. And it was because we were still throwing out things at the last minute and trying to improve it. And we were just raising the level of the quality. And it was still this sort of this thing of making stuff and having it ready and then deciding, no, not good enough. We're going to redo it, even though there's, two days left. And so that sense of like iterating and creeping towards betterment is something that I wish I knew earlier.
You're a creative, a maker, a builder. You start Wired magazine, it grows, and when that happens, you have to take on different roles, right? Not just a maker, but a manager as well. One of
Right,
Paul Graham's
exactly.
essays, I'm sure you've read it. And I'm curious about that part for you, how you were able to oscillate back and forth between being a maker, which it feels like is
Yeah, yeah.
kind of who you are at your core, but then also managing a business and growing something that became amazingly cool. So I'd be curious about that process.
Well, one of the things that took, again, another piece of advice that took me a long time to understand, and I try to encapsulate it very, very briefly, which is, our time, your time, my time, is the most valuable asset we have by far. I mean, that's the only scarcity there is. And so that therefore the highest leverage thing that you can do, if time is your greatest asset, is to convince someone else to use their time on your project. Right?
Yeah.
It's like the most valuable thing is your time. So I'm going to take some of your time for what I want done. That's hiring, but it's also outsourcing. And so I was kind of a hippie do-it-yourself thing, and that I was always thinking that, you kind of do it yourself. And I didn't, early on in the beginning of the internets, didn't do a tech company because like I don't program. How can I, I don't program. I can't do a tech company. And the idea that, will you hire a programmer, just had never occurred to me, um, that you could just outsource and use someone else's time. So this idea then of kind of like of bringing other people on board and trying to maximize them was a step that was sort of not natural to me. And the to be honest about Wired, um, the reason why I did Wired was because um, Lewis, Rosetta, and Jane, the other co-founders, the major co-founders, I realized that I didn't have the kind of business skills that I needed to run this. And he did. And that was why I said, yes, I'm going to join this, because there are people who have the skills that I don't have, the business skills of running a business. And they were running the business. Mostly they were running the business. I was in charge of the editorial, and that was a good thing. So I partnered with them to run the business. I didn't have to deal with the bankers and the investors and stuff, but I realized enough, having done my own magazine myself and two other magazines, that I didn't have those skills. So I would partner with somebody, either hire them or join them as a partner to do it. So that was my solution: was work with people smarter than yourself on the things that you can or don't want to do.
It makes so much sense. Getting back into some of the parts of it, which I think also relates to kind of the creative pursuits as well as how to support your family, as it may
Right.
be a better way to say this. And that is, don't create things to make money so you can create
Yes.
things. The reward for good work is more work. It speaks so much to me, Kevin, because my favorite thing to do is this. And this does have a direct channel to make money, which is like selling ads and things like that. The consultative work, the speaking, the books, the advising of companies, I do love it. Don't get me wrong, but this is what I love the most: is speaking with
Right.
somebody who's far wiser than me, learning from them, and like just the
Sure.
like when I do an energy audit, right? What gives me the most energy? This is it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
you do some of the other things so that you can do this, right?
Sure.
You
Yeah,
make
yes.
that
Yes.
money. So I so felt that quote. I'd love for you to talk more about like the reward is that you get to keep doing it. And yes, you got to go
Exactly.
find ways to make money, but the reward is that like this is it right now. Like we're living
Right.
it
Right. Right.
literally in this moment.
Rather than trying to focus on tasks that you can get through as fast as possible, focus on doing tasks that you want to do as long as possible.
Oh,
That was sort of like the holy trinity for most people, which is, to be doing something you love to do, doing something you're good at doing, and then doing something that is valued and you get paid for. But there is another level, and that was the thing that I didn't know, and it took me a long time to understand. That's in the book right now, which is, don't aim to be the best, aim to be the only. The place that you want to get to is, you want to get to the place where you can say, am I good at this? Do I enjoy it? Does it pay well? But can anybody else do it? That's a business or an individual. And if the answer is a lot of other people do it, it's like, well, you want to move on to that place where those first three things are true, and you're the only one who is doing this or could do it. And so that's my little bit of advice for young people: is try to work on something and somewhere where there's no name for what it is that you're doing.
I love it. There's this video that went viral a couple years ago. It's Pharrell is, you may have seen this, visiting, I think it was a college where there was a music school or people who were majoring in music, and they were making music. And he was sitting in and listening to what they were coming up with. And he sits down with this young woman, and you could tell she's a little bit nervous, and she presses play on the song that comes up, and his face immediately gets kind of like, what? It
Yeah.
not the head turns a little bit. He kind of looks at her like, and she's still kind of she can't look him in the eye because you're a little nervous when you're first showing your music. and it's this beautiful song. I mean, it's awesome. It's not like anything I'd heard before, and it stops. This is emotional, actually, telling the story.
Yes.
It stops. He looks at her and he goes, "I have absolutely no notes. That is so beautiful. It is so
Huh.
good. You know why? Because I've never heard anything like that before.
Huh.
Only you can do that."
I was walking through icy streams that took my breath away, moving slowly through westward water over glacial plains, and I walked off you, and I walked off and owned me. Oh my, I thought it was a dream, so it seemed.
Wow. Wow. I have zero notes for that. And I'll tell you why. It's because you're doing your own thing. It's singular. It's like when the Wu-Tang Clan came out, like no one could really judge it. You either liked it or you didn't, but you couldn't compare it to anything else. And that is such a special quality, and all of us possess that ability, but you have to be willing to seek, and you have to be willing to be like real frank in your music and frank in your choices. And sometimes like most of the time people will say, okay, I'm gonna make this kind of song, so it ends up sounding like something we've heard before or felt before.
What guts, too. This girl's probably 21, 22.
Right,
She's with
right.
one of her musical heroes. Presses play, and this dude is blown out of like the world of,
Right,
oh my
right,
gosh, she's so good. This is so original. That, though, is really hard. I think it's
Really hard.
easier. It's easier to be to try to be like the next Beatles or
Yes, right.
something along those
Exactly.
lines, because you can hear it. You've seen it, right? It's familiar. It's
Right.
harder to be that young woman who presses play next to her musical hero to say, "What do you think?" Because you know why? Because she could have been deeply embarrassed. He could have been like, "Oh my
Yes.
God, this is terrible. How can I let her off nicely?"
Exactly. Right.
That's the thing. Like, how do you get people? How do you inspire people, Kevin, to press play on that, to create that thing? And by the way, I don't think this is just for art. I don't think this is just for people who like write or make things. This is for leaders in general, of being a leader in your own unique way, being being one, not
Sure.
just somebody who, like I said, creates a beautiful painting, but it's somebody who actually leads other people in a business.
Like most things, it's actually a skill that you can get better at. And I
Yeah.
think we all have natural talents in different places that we start. But that's the thing about these, is that no matter where you start, you can always improve. And so I think this is a skill. And I was, um, I'm pretty sure there's like other skills where she gets there because this is not the first time that she has pressed play, right?
Right.
That you practice this, you work up to it. It's part of education. It's part of how you're making your life, where you are looking for those things. You're gravitating to things. You're trying stuff and it works, it doesn't work. And by the way, here's the really paradoxical aspect of this. Like the only way that you can become this unique and only person is with the help of other people. All right. It's like really strange. It's like you need everybody else to become unique. And so you need family and friends and siblings and customers and clients and colleagues and consultants, whatever it is. You need the world around you in order to help you arrive at the place that only you can get to by yourself. Right. And so it's like a strange thing. So you have to use that world. And so that's part of growing up. And so if everybody else is around you is helping you develop that, then it'll be easier to be
By help,
successful.
do you mean say, hey, what do you think of this? Can you give me feedback? Having those group chats of mentors. I'm thinking this because this is what I have, where I say, hey,
Right.
I'm giving a speech. What do you think of this bit? And I may even record it and send it to that
Sure.
group. The only rule is brutal honesty, right? Is that what
Sure.
you mean by you need the help of others to give you feedback along the way?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's writing in public, it's prototyping, as we were
Yeah.
talking about, where you're putting stuff unfinished. That's the time where you can actually change things rather than when it's done. Doing multiple versions of it, but you're kind of listening to the universe to give feedback, because we are opaque to our own selves. We're just, our human beings are just, we don't have access to how we actually think. And so it takes other people to kind of help us see who we are, what we're good at, to as you said, be honest about what was working, what not is not working. And also to I mean, the question that we kind of want to be asking each other is like, can anybody else do this? Are you you know, are you on that path to look for something, or are you just sort of trying to be the best of something that's already existed? Or is your success just a imitation of someone else's success?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the issue with like trying to be the best basketball player in the world, is that that's a very limited number, high competition, and everybody knows what that looks like already. So the likelihood of you doing that is like 1 in a billion. The likelihood of you going out and doing something your own is the opposite. You're much more likely, and that's sort of a little bit the origin of the thousand true fans idea, that you want to change your definition of success,
Yeah.
which is not to imitate someone else's, but to actually engineer your own version of success.
I sent some of the earliest versions of my first book to my friend Todd Henry, who's published 6 or 7 books. Amazingly great speaker and writer, and I'm so grateful for his feedback. He said, "This is a cover band. What you've sent me is a cover band, and cover bands don't change the world. Cover
Mm-hmm.
bands can have a fine career. You can do actually pretty well. You can do
Yeah,
fine,
yeah.
but I know you, and you want to make an impact. And this
Sure.
is a cover band book right now. So
Right.
my suggestion is, while it probably helped you to write what you've got so far, is to
Right.
throw it away
Right.
and to start anew as if you're the original band, not covering like 2 or 3 or 4 other bands. And that analogy sticks with me of cover bands don't change the world.
Right.
You can live a fine life if that's your
Right.
choice to be a cover band. But if you have higher ambitions, then that life's not for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it should be like that book should be the book that your aspiration for the book that will change things would be a book that's probably doesn't fit into any category. It's going to take some time to explain to someone as well. It's not, it's kind of whatever it is. And so, it's ahead of the language. There's not a name for what it is that it's actually trying to do.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's writing a book, and I was delighted because it's possible that book would just be so strange in many ways. I can't think of another book that would be like it. And it could either be a huge flop or a great success, but it's not going to be in the middle of a cover band.
Yeah.
And that's the risk. The risk is that it could be a flop, and that's good.
Yeah. Well, and as long as it's like authentically you, from a leadership
Yeah.
position perspective, if you're standing up in front of your group, that's the one thing we all can see rather quickly is if
Right.
you're authentically you, and we follow people more who are than those who are trying to
Exactly.
be somebody else. I have a follow-up actually, Kevin, on feedback. So I'm thinking of Brene Brown and the man in the arena quote that she shares in her books, that basically, if you're not down in the arena with me,
Right.
I don't care about your feedback. I don't need your feedback. I want feedback from people who are in the arena. What do you think about that?
You can't go with conventional wisdom all the time. You have to buck what everybody knows. You have to persevere even when everyone's telling you you're nuts, or else you have to listen to what they do and quit what you're doing because it's not working. And so and that's sort of where you need other people to help you kind of make that. So there is both going on. It's a dilemma, and it's an art of when to be the man in the arena who is saying, I'm not going to listen to what you're saying, to I'm paying a lot of attention to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no formula, I think, for deciding. It's art and listening and all these other signals, but that is a balance. You're kind of on surfing on a wave where on one side you have to not pay attention to what people are saying and what the conventions are, and the other side is you are definitely paying attention to it.
And I do think it matters who those people are. Like, are they in your foxhole with you? Do they genuinely care for you? Are they pumped when things go well? Are they bummed when things go bad in a genuine way? They literally and deeply care for you. That doesn't mean they're going to be right?
Right.
But that is, I think, a part of it, that at a minimum, they are trying their best to help you, versus the critic who sits up high in the stands and yells from the cheap seats.
One of my bits of advice in the book is when one of those people points out to you something that's wrong, they're usually right. When they are suggesting a solution, how to fix it, they're usually wrong.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So because just in general, in life in general, it's much easier to identify the things that are wrong.
Yeah.
And that's true. That's why there's critics everywhere. They're usually right. But coming up with something that works is extremely difficult. And that's not going to be easy, and they're usually wrong about that. So that generative act is so much harder than the criticism act. And there's like 100 to 1, whatever it is. And so when people are criticizing, you have to understand that that's like cheap. That's cheapness. It's inexpensive. They could be utterly correct, but generating the actual solution is a very different matter, and they're usually not correct about that.
I like this one. Habit is far more dependable than inspiration. Don't focus on getting into shape. Focus on becoming the kind of person who never misses a workout. That one really spoke to me, because I was literally reading it on the elliptical this morning again while working out, because that is the type of person I am. I don't miss, and that's very important to me. It affects me mentally just as much or more than physically. And so, can you share more about this? Habits more dependable than inspiration, right? Be the kind of person, as opposed to whatever the actual task is.
So there's something really odd about habits, and that is in our identity. The consistency is more important than the intention, I guess is the word. And this is ancient wisdom, Stoic. This is current stuff from James Clear and Atomic Habits. This is well established, kind of scientifically proven in terms of looking at studies and people doing it, is that you commit to the process, and then the outcome, rather than committing to the outcome. So it's not hard for someone to actually occasionally make something good, almost accidentally. But if you want to consistently make it, and that's true whether it's an exercise habit or producing a book or a podcast, is that you do it on a consistent basis. And that consistency is the fountain of the great stuff, because you're going to have days when you aren't very good, or that you don't produce the results that you want. So you don't focus on the results, you focus on the process. Mm-hmm. And that process is something that you hold dear, and that process is what will make the good stuff.
I love setting process-oriented goals.
Right.
versus results-based goals.
Exactly.
Right? Because I have complete control over the
Right.
process and over
Exactly.
that element of it. I don't have control over the outcome, right? The BHAG world, I get it, and it looks better after
Right.
the fact. We set this giant audacious goal and
Sure.
we hit
Sure.
it. Look at us. Well, you
Right.
hit it because of the system you put in place every
Exactly.
day, not because you set the BHAG.
And the other thing, I mean, kind of like, just for exercise or those kinds of things, you can see it, but this is also works for creativity and actually greatness. So the idea is that I always remember Terry Gross saying, she did her daily radio show. It's like, the benefit of it being daily is if you have a really crappy session or event, it doesn't matter because you're there tomorrow and you're going to do it again. And it's that kind of consistency that actually allows you to generate great things, because in order to get something great, you have to have a lot of crap. You have to do a lot of mediocre ones to get to where you want. And all the YouTube stars, they all say, yeah, you want to be a YouTube star, post 100 videos and you'll almost be there. It's you just have to do it. And that doing it on a regular basis, most of them will not be spectacular, but the only way to get that to a spectacular one is to do it. So it's a process. So you're focused on the process. The results will vary tremendously, but you're not focused on making the great thing. You're focused on doing it, and out of that will come the great thing.
It's like the parable of the pottery class. Have you heard of that one?
Exactly.
The teacher divides the class into two groups. Hey, this one group,
Right.
listen, in 30 days, you're going to produce the best possible pot you can. So
Right.
you're going to work and practice, do whatever you can. This other group, you got to produce a pot per day. Okay? A pot per day. You got to work on it and create one per day. And at the end of 30 days, they measured the pot from the group that's only about quality, right? Only about quality versus the group that was only about quantity, right? You're going to practice and actually create a pot a day. And the quantity group absolutely destroyed the quality group because they actually did it. We learn who we are in practice, not in theory. We learn by doing, not sitting there trying to perfect the thing, but not doing it. I think that applies to so many different areas in our lives.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. That was in Art and Fear is the book where that story was told. And so there is this sense of the process. And I mean, we say quantity, but what we're really talking about is a process. You're focused on that process.
Yeah.
That process generates quantity. And the beautiful thing about that is that it also cultivates a generosity. In order to be able to comfortably toss away things that are not good, is you have to believe that there's more where that came from. And one of the things you get from doing something on a regular basis is you have confidence that there's more of that where that's come from, that you can kind of keep doing it. And so the more you do it, the more kind of free you are to abandon things, to redo them, to toss them out, to forget them, because you're in this mode and being very generous with them, and just kind of the mode of abundance. And that's crucial, I think, to this kind of process in the creative world that we're talking about.
I think all of your bits of advice are great for leaders and leadership, but this one you actually use the word lead.
Yeah.
And it is, you lead by letting others know what you expect of them, which may exceed what they themselves expect. Provide them a reputation to live up to. Kevin, personal example real quick, and then I want you to expand. My high school football coaches, two of them, Bob Gregg and Ron Ullery, they thought higher of me than I thought of myself.
Yeah.
They expected more from me than I expected of myself. And I'd like to think I have high expectations, but then as a immature, insecure young kid, not as much.
Right.
Their belief in me and then pushing me so hard created performance that I honestly did not think I was capable of, which then led to a college scholarship and a whole life in that world.
Right.
That's because of them. That's because of their leadership. Like, how powerful is that, man? Like, we have that ability to do that for other people. Like, that's what leadership's all about, right? Is, I love how you wrote, provide them a reputation to live up to. That's just beautiful, man.
Right. It's funny you mentioned it because that's exactly, I had a track coach in high school. And that was
Oh,
exactly who I was
that's,
thinking of,
I love
who
it.
believed that I could run. It was like, it's like he didn't really actually tell me what he thought I could, because I would not have, I would have walked away, but he kind of moved me. And I realized that, all along he was sort of had a certain time that he believed I could get to. And yeah. So he gave me the image that he believed and that I could walk into, and that was really great. So yes, and I think there's another bit of advice that related to leadership too, which is that your goal as a leader is not to have followers, but to make leaders. And I got that from, well, I was inspired by Jeff Bezos, who came by the Wired offices very early on. We were talking about hiring because we were trying to hire like crazy, and this is the beginning of the, in the 1990s. And when tech companies were kind of a new thing, they were kind of a new breed of animal, and this kind of super growth was unknown before. And Jeff was saying, yeah, I looked. There's one quality, one main quality I'm looking for when people that I'm hiring, and that is that they're really good judges of character and can hire themselves. That they're good hirers themselves. So I'm looking at this. It was like, wow, that's an incredible amount of foresight. So he's looking at for leaders who can make other leaders. It's like, wow. And that sort of blew my mind, but it was actually utterly true that's if for that kind of a growth
How do
of,
you do that? How do you judge if somebody else is a good judge of character and will make good
I
hires?
I wish I had done the Tim Ferriss thing and drilled down with
Yeah.
him, but there was not the proper setting for that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That is a really good question,
Yeah.
of how that
It's
second
really
order
hard
of
to
thing.
predict, right? It's just
It,
hard.
it is. It is. There's lots of little exercises you can do to kind of ferret that out. But I'd never heard of someone saying, like, I don't know, maybe you could do it in a kind of a charrette or some kind of a workshop where there are um, picking sides or picking people.
Well,
But I don't know. I should ask
one of
him.
the things I try to do, I was in a role prior to doing this full time where I was hiring leaders. So
Yeah,
directors and managers reported to me as a VP role. It's not, this isn't foolproof because nothing is, but looking at their track record, if they of the people they've hired in their past and what those people did. So I
okay,
kept
good.
I kept detailed track of my hires so that I could share that when I was going for leadership roles. This is what the people have done that I've hired. Here's how they've performed.
Yeah,
Here's where they are. Here's the promotions they earned.
yeah,
They're not all at my company anymore because they've gotten
yeah.
poached because they're
Right,
so it was a way of kind of showing I try to be a talent scout
right,
and then
right.
develop that talent to then get
Sure.
recruited. And I don't. My dad helped me a lot with that, and so I was lucky to have that. But I think that was one thing, but it wasn't foolproof because sometimes people
Right,
don't
right,
have accurate records of all that stuff. But that was something that I
right.
thought probably helped me get hired earlier than maybe I should have.
A related piece of advice, not about leadership per se, but which is, it's always unfortunate when someone that you train really well leaves, but it's worse if you don't train them and they stay.
Yeah, for sure.
So, so the other bit of advice is like, you train someone so well that they could easily get another job, but you treat them so well that they never want to leave.
Sometimes I get criticized for which I don't know why. And simply, this is one of the shortest ones, one of your shortest bits, but I try to live by it. Promptness is a sign of respect. We were both early to this Zoom because I think we both believe in this. Just expand on this one of being prompt and being you're either early or you're late. You're not on time,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, there's no
Right.
such thing as being on time. You're
Right.
either early or you're late, and it's your choice. And I am choosing to be early, and because it's a sign of respect. Because the other thing is that when you are late, the first thing people start to do is to think of all your flaws. They think, it's like, what else?
Because
What
you're
else?
just waiting. Yeah.
So
So,
yeah.
okay, there's a counter to this, though. Adam Grant, who I deeply respect, who's been on this podcast, a very good author and thinker and speaker, he completely disagrees with this because he says something along the lines of, if I am deep in conversation with the person before you that I'm meeting with, it goes long sometimes. And if it goes long, then I am late to the next meeting. And to me, to him, he says it's about like respect. Not that he
I
cares, but I disagree and
I
said,
disagree.
figure out your calendar so that
Right.
if you go long, you go long. I don't know. Like, how do you
Oh,
respond to that?
I fundamentally disagree. I would
Yeah.
have a huge argument because I would say, here's what it is. This person you're going to converse with, you and I, we say, look, we're going to stop at 10 o'clock, whatever it is, because we both have something to go on. I respect you. I'm respecting your time, and you're respecting my time. And even if we're in the middle of something, we're going to be mutually agreeable, and that's the condition. And by the way, I didn't write about this in the book, but there's another thing about interruptions, which is for me, when I'm having a face-to-face conversation with someone, that trumps the conversation with someone by phone, which trumps someone by email. So in other words, I would say, like, I'm not gonna, if I'm having a conversation with someone and my phone rings, I don't answer it
Right.
unless I say at the beginning of the conversation, I sit down. It's like, I'm expecting a call, a very important call that I might get
Yeah.
during this. So forgive me, but if I have to stop that. Otherwise, I'm ignoring any kind of, because that takes preference. That's the priority. And if I'm on the phone, then I'm not going to be emailing or reading a text unless I say, okay, there may be a phone, I may have to be interrupted. So you're kind of doing the respectful thing of saying that there's a condition here. So I think your friend is completely wrong in that you should just say, this is the parameters of our conversation. We're both respecting our time. And if I need to go in the middle of it, we'll continue at some other time.
Okay, a couple more before we have that hard stop. This is true, colon. It's hard to cheat an honest person. I view this, I may be wrong, let me know,
Right.
as I like leading with trust. I like extending trust to others before they
Right.
have earned it. Jim Collins told me this on this podcast, right? Make the trust wager. His mentor, Bill Lazier, said it's a better way to live. I 100% agree. I trust you, Kevin, before you have earned it from me. You'll never have to earn it. You can break
Right.
it, and if you break it, I won't trust you. But
Sure.
you have it now. And to
Sure.
me, I found living that way with that posture of leading with trust, the type of people that I want to be around seem to be attracted in this orbit. And the ones who cheat and steal, we don't seem to do well together. It just doesn't really jive. And so that's what I gather from that statement. Am I right there?
You're absolutely right. And here's the thing is that when you have that kind of trust first, the default, what that means is that occasionally, every now and then, you might be cheated.
Yep.
I consider that a tax.
Yes.
Or the huge, overwhelming abundance that you get by trusting everybody as default. So yes, there are occasional things, but that's just a small tax, and it's minor compared to the benefits that you get of when you trust people and treat them well. They give you their best, and so, okay, occasional cheat. That's I'm willing to pay that little tax.
Yes, 100% worth it. Another one, show me your calendar and I will tell you your priorities. Tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you where you're going. So true, right? What are you actually doing? What you're doing tells me what you value most. What's most important to you is showing me what you actually do. Not telling me, but showing me, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it is 100% where it goes back to, you change the world not by what you say or how you vote or even what you believe, but what you do. And that action is so I have an action bias, a bias to action. The action is the way we think. You have to write something in order to think it. It's the way we actually influence you do things. It's the way that we get things done and create habits. It's much easier to change how you think by acting it out than to change how you act by thinking about it. So it's a bias to action, which is, in general, and I think part of Silicon Valley culture as well.
Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk about, others have too, and I've thought a lot about this recently, this inner versus outer scorecard or scoreboard. And one of your bits is don't measure your life with someone else's ruler. And to me, I take that as like creating your own code, your own core principles and values, and living by that versus whatever you're seeing on Instagram, for example.
I was
How do you
thinking
feel?
less of the values and more of your definition of success or victory or whatever you want to call
Yep.
it. I think I don't know. I tend to think that a lot of our values do converge on something similar. Treat others well, blah blah blah. But I think our ideas of what is successful can really vary, and part of this idea of being not the best, but being the only is about like having some idea of what a successful life would look for you. Something I ask my kids all the time. They're kind of almost tired of hearing it. So I sit them down when they're kind of trying to make this sense. What would you do with $1 billion? Okay, what would you do? I'm going to give you $1 billion. What would you do? And for most people, they're kind of like, well, I'll buy a house and I'll buy a yacht, maybe travel around the world. And say, okay, you still have $1 billion. You haven't spent any of that.
Yeah.
And then, what do you really want to do? And there'll be something. I want to go start a knitting store or something like that. I say, you don't need $1 billion to do that. Okay, you don't need whatever it is. You don't need $1 billion to travel around the world. You need $5,000. And so your definition of success, you really want to focus on what that means, because it is probably more attainable than you think, and it doesn't usually require a lot of money.
This is awesome, Kevin. I so appreciate you coming back now. It's been a while since we talked, and I highly recommend your latest book, Excellent Advice for Living, Wisdom I Wish I'd Known Earlier by Kevin Kelly. It's so good, man. And I think it's so hard to actually write a book like this, to make it so concise and so useful and practical. You make it look easy. I think that's the mark of someone who's just really good at something, is like, oh yeah, I could do that book. I could write that book. You're like, then you sit down to try to write. I'm like, no, I couldn't. I can't write that book. And I think that's like being the only, or that's making the hard look really good. So I highly recommend it. It's awesome. I reread it again this morning. Thanks again for doing this, man. And I would love to continue our dialogue as we both progress. This has been so much fun, man.
It was really great. I enjoyed every minute of this, and thank you for the fantastic questions. I really appreciate your support and interest.
Thank you so much, man. All right. Yep.